Both leaders suspend campaign activities following the death of Pope Francis. But the third leaders' debate will still go ahead tonight. Will the gloves stay on? I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says arrangements are in train for the Governor-General Sam Mostyn to attend the funeral of Pope Francis as Australia's representative. Mr Albanese says he's spoken with Ms Mostyn. Flags are also flying at half-mast on Commonwealth buildings around Australia today. I'll speak to Labor frontbencher Tony Burke later this hour. Both major parties paused their election campaigns today following the passing of Pope Francis ahead of a leadership debate tonight. We'll speak to the Archbishop of Melbourne, Peter Comensoli, about what this moment means for Australian Catholics, live in just a moment. And a news poll out today has found a fall in support for the coalition from women voters, and Labor gaining support in every mainland state, including Victoria. Is there still time for the opposition leader to make up ground? I'll ask my panel of ex-prime ministerial advisors. To the top story today, both leaders have suspended their campaigns after morning media rounds this morning. Now, the Prime Minister, who is a man of Catholic faith, was often emotional while speaking about the legacy of the Pontiff today, but was keen to underscore Australia's secular democracy when asked about the impact it would have on the election.
Look, I try not to talk about my faith in public. For so many Catholics, I think his humility, for the way that he embraced the poor, the way that he embraced the social justice message that I see as the message of Jesus Christ. People will, I think, separate these things and can make their decisions about the election on the 3rd of May. You know, I think it's very important that we have a secular democracy.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton expressed his condolences to Catholics and reflected on the Pope's dedication to lifting up the poor. Mr Dutton also said today was not for politicking.
The day is best spent reflecting, and obviously pre-polling, etc., opens today, and all of that will continue on. But I don't think there's a place for, you know, the body blows of politics today. I think it's a very different day from that, and we obviously had made commitments to do television this morning, but I think the rest of the day really is probably best left in reflection as opposed to out there overt politicking, and I think that's something that most people would respect.
Greens leader Adam Bandt also memorialised Pope Francis, focusing on his commitment to social justice issues like war in the Middle East and climate change.
Pope Francis made some really significant contributions to the push for equality around the world, for peace in Palestine, and also for real action on climate. He made an extraordinary effort to connect the church with some really strong pushes for social justice that resonate with many people right here around the country, and a lot of people we know will be feeling the events of today, and we share our thoughts with them.
The Pope's death has led to a pause in the official federal election campaign, with both leaders spending today reflecting on the Pontiff's legacy. Tonight, the leaders will face off for the third election debate on Channel 9. It's unusual timing for a debate in the wake of this news, where Australians would usually be switching on to focus on the election, but are focused on the death of the Pope and its ramifications. Now, Pope Francis's death comes in the final 2 weeks of the federal election campaign. It's a period that's already been disrupted by long weekends, the Easter holidays, of course, the looming Anzac Day holiday as well. It's forced campaigning to go on the back burner, but I still think it's a net positive for the Prime Minister, who was raised a Catholic and often invokes the Catholic Church as part of his Holy Trinity. The Catholic Church, the Labor Party and the Rabbitohs Football Club that he refers to often, including today. And if you believe the polling, and of course we have to be cautious about polling, but if you are believing the consistent polling, the Prime Minister is in front. So a cessation of hostilities really only robs the coalition of more time to make their case to the Australian people. There have been services across the country and around the world for Pope Francis following his death. The Archbishop of Melbourne, Peter Comensoli, led afternoon mass at St Patrick's Cathedral today in Melbourne and highlighted his support for asylum seekers, the work that the Pope did in relation to the poor and asylum seekers. The Archbishop joins me now. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Patricia.
It's lovely to speak to you again. You have published a statement saying, and I quote, "Pope Francis has been the father of the poor and a witness of joy and hope." How will you remember the Pope?
For me, Patricia, there's been something of a reflection on his gestures. He was very much a man of gestures. He wrote all sorts of beautiful and important things, but it was in his gestures like going to Lampedusa at the height of the crisis around refugees and migrants coming from North Africa making their way into Europe. His gestures around those who are poor. If you go to St. Peter's these days, you will see that there are all sorts of ways in which those who are living rough are cared for in and around St. Peter's itself. You see it in his gestures towards those who are struggling in all sorts of ways. And I think for me, that's been at the heart of my reflection over these last 24 hours.
As the Archbishop of Melbourne, how important is it that the Pope set that standard, and what impact did it have on your role and on the people coming to your church and being able to engage in Catholicism in Australia?
For all of us, we look to a Pope, whoever that Pope might be, as a witness. They're the primary witnesses to faith in Jesus Christ, in seeing how our belief in God influences how we live and act and reach out to others. So he's had a significant impact on me at the level of the manner in which he himself has exercised that witness to Christ. I think people have picked that up generally. It's striking, I think, that our two primary political leaders would cease the activities of the campaign such that Pope Francis has clearly been of deep influence in that regard. So this is not just for Catholics.
No, and
Pope
it does.
Francis has been a leader for the world, if you like.
Yeah, and he is quite a well-loved Pope, which, of course, is quite significant. I mean, you've got sort of politicians across the board, even the Greens leader, lauding him for the work he's done on the poor and refugees. Just give me a sense of that social justice character of his papacy and how important that's been.
The living out of our faith is very much a living for the sake of others. Francis has done that in ways, particularly around seeking peaceful means to the conflicts of the world. He's done that also in significant gestures. A few years ago, he got down on his hands and knees. This old man, whose health even then wasn't great, got down on his hands and knees and kissed the feet of the leaders in Sudan as a gesture of humility and as a gesture to them to work towards reconciliation. To see, therefore, those sorts of acts of justice, but always, and this was a major, major stress of Pope Francis, always in the key of mercy. Mercy just was the word that constantly came from him, and the calling of mercy for all of us.
I heard an Indigenous person a little earlier reflect on the role he played for Indigenous people across the world. And of course, the Catholic Church, including you, were arguing for a yes case in the referendum that was obviously lost. But how important was he in guiding those kinds of perspectives in terms of your own advocacy in our own country?
On a broader scale, he was very significant. He at times made references specifically to our circumstances here in Australia, but at a more broad perspective, the speaking into the way in which Indigenous peoples of particular locations and cultures are all to be called into a life that is good for them and that reaches out to the goodness of their cultures and lives. That was something that he did in very significant ways. Again, to think back at, he held a synod, which is one of our highest forms of consultation and discernment. He had one just for the Amazonian region of the world, and that was done principally to find ways in which those peoples might be able to flourish.
The ABC's Religion and Ethics editor, Scott Stephens, has said the challenge for Francis's legacy will be whether his successor will continue with the late Pope's more pastoral approach. Is that the sort of approach? I know that you don't end up getting a vote, but is that the sort of approach that you hope the next process, which will be and such a complex process and so steeped in ritual, do you hope that it delivers that kind of Pope for the future?
The next Pope will be different. Fairly easy to say that because the next Pope will be the witness who the other cardinals choose from amongst them. But that's been the case always. My memory goes back to Paul VI when I was a younger lad. And then when first John Paul I and then very soon afterwards John Paul II, each very different. Then Benedict, different again. Francis, each has brought something of a particular way in which they have exercised their ministry of service to the Church. You think of John Paul II, extraordinary presence on the world stage, a humanitarian, Christian humanitarian in a way that was quite amazing. Benedict, the theologian, but we're still reading Benedict in 300 years' time. Francis, the pastor and the shepherd. So each has been different. The next will be different. It'd be to take away from, I think, the gift that is given in a pope to try and delineate the way in which that might be exercised.
Just final question. Give me a sense of the people who've come through your doors today. I imagine that you have seen traffic that you haven't seen for a while of people wanting to pay their respects.
Certainly the numbers are up. We had two public services today, the two masses, one at 7, one at 1. And, you know, a good number of people, much more than who would normally be there. And all walks of life. You know, there were people who are, you know, quite dressed down and, you know, clearly haven't got a whole pile of fancy stuff, through to suits and everyone was there. that speaks volumes, I think, of just how our Pope, the most recent, Francis, has influenced their lives, and that they would see the need to give expression to their grief and sadness, but also to pray for him and for the next Pope.
Archbishop, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Patricia.
Anthony Albanese isn't the only prominent Catholic in the government. I spoke to the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke about his reaction to the passing of Pope Francis amid the suspension in campaigning a short time ago. Minister, welcome to the program.
Hi, good to be back.
Anthony Albanese has said he thought the Pope would be recorded in history as one of the most significant Holy Fathers. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I do. It's I'm a Catholic, so I was at the cathedral this morning for the early Mass. This particular Holy Father has been extraordinary in that pastoral role, I guess, of trying to find people who would be considered on the fringes and making sure that they feel welcomed and brought back in. And he's done that in a whole lot of ways. But one of my favourite symbols in all the traditions of the churches is that bishops, archbishops, popes, they carry what, for people who aren't of the same faith, it looks like some sort of Gandalf staff, but it's actually the symbol of a shepherd. And for me, the way Pope Francis acted, the way he reached out to people, was exactly what you'd want from a good shepherd. And so there was a real pastoral role that he played that I think has made a lot more people feel included. And I think after the church had been through some really, really difficult years, a lot of people were able to turn back with a bit more hope.
You mentioned you're also a Catholic. Have you met the Pope?
No, I'd met his two predecessors, although I did, as Immigration Minister, issue a visa for him.
He's never been to Australia?
That's right. When he went to Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea, we wanted to make sure that Australian hospitals were available to him. So shortly after I became Minister for Immigration, after the reshuffle, the brief arrives to sign off for a visa to Australia for His Holiness Pope Francis. So I signed that. At some point that'll exist somewhere within the archives, but yeah, that's the closest connection that I've had in that way with him.
That's a really interesting story. Now, the campaigns have been suspended today, but there is a debate tonight. Just firstly to the suspension of the campaigns, why has that been important at this juncture?
Look, a campaign can get pretty willing, and you get different moments where the mood of the Australian community really doesn't want that. And right now, I think with what's happened, and it's not just Catholics, can I say I've been really touched by the number of people who've reached out through social media, either in public posts or directly to me, knowing my faith, and they are people of no faith or very, very different faiths, just reaching out with condolences. There is a real generosity from Australians in a moment like this, and I think it's really important that our political leaders hear that or are aware of that. So I was really glad when it was decided that you wouldn't have the same sort of partisan conversations during the day today. And while the debate's still going ahead, the tone of it certainly, I think we can expect it to be a little bit more subdued.
And how about the impact on the election full stop, I wonder? I mean, lots of theories, lots of analysis, no doubt. People have different views. But there has been certainly an argument that Labor has become more estranged from its religious constituency and its Catholic roots in some ways. Is this a chance to reconnect with that constituency? And is there a risk in a secular country, in a country that's extremely multicultural and multi-faith, of going maybe too far or in that direction?
Look, I just think we all no matter what's happening, you just be true to who you are. And the Prime Minister's done that. The same for me. My electorate's probably a little bit different because my electorate has, I think, the highest level of people practicing of various faiths of any electorate in Australia, and everyone's very, very respectful of each other's faiths. A whole lot of people aren't people of faith at all, and that's fine. This is modern Australia. So I just don't see it in a political context. I see it in a situation where there is a person who has been one of the great contributors to global society, has had a position of power and dealt with it through prayer and humility. And it's a time when people are honouring that. I don't really see there being a political context to it, other than there'll be a whole lot more people praying at the moment. But, who knows where that ends up.
And a spike in church attendance, I assume. And I think there's always a bit of a spike during Easter as well, when people are much more, connected to these things. Just on the debate again, before we get to other issues. It is a strange time to still have a debate. Why wasn't it called off so it can be a day off, full stop, from politics?
Oh, look, I wasn't part of those conversations. I don't think you need to say there'll be no political conversation. I don't think you need to say that there aren't issues that are at stake in the election, that the conversation will still occur. And obviously any of the aggression of that is not happening at all during the day today. But tonight it'll sort of be a little bit of a reset, I guess, once the debate takes place.
So is it gloves off tonight?
I don't believe it'll be like that. And can I say, I've listened to your podcasts, I've been listening to them each day, but the ones that you've been doing after each of the debates, and the expectation, there's often this sense of disappointment that I hear that, there wasn't a knockout punch. You don't get knockout punches really in these sorts of debates. What you get is a chance for the Australian people to get a better sense of where the leaders are coming from and what their plans are. And at a time where cost of living is such an issue for the Australian community, obviously I've been really pleased to see the Prime Minister be able to get out each of those debates, and I presume there'll be more of it tonight, just explaining the impact of our plan for cost of living as to the impact on wages, the impact on prices, whether it be medicines or childcare, and also making sure that we're letting people know what we're doing, trying to make it a bit easier for people who've been saving for a deposit for a home.
Tony Burke, just on a few other issues. You left an event due to safety concerns after WhatsApp messages were circulated urging people to come to prayers that were being held to protest your presence. Of course, this is in the wake of Gaza, and of course there's people with really strong views about the way that should be managed. Is that the only threat you've received, or has this been a campaign of threats for you?
Look, I obviously won't go too much into the detail of the security situation. I mean, I will say that it's the most aggressive campaign that I've had by a long way. I don't blame any of the other candidates for that. And certainly the event that you refer to, the people of concern there, it wasn't even the place of prayer that they would normally go to. I'm not even sure if they were from my part of Sydney at all. But, there's wildly different reactions. So, that particular WhatsApp message was with respect to issues around Palestine. If I just tell you, when I went to Bankstown pre-poll this morning, did it get to stay as long as I'd planned because I had to come here. But when I got out of the car, the first person I spoke to was himself from Gaza, who was thanking me for what we've been doing. We had a long conversation. I then went round the corner and there was someone, not Palestinian, someone I presume a similar ethnicity or ethnic background to me, holding a Greens how to vote, telling me I've never done anything for the Palestinian people. There's wildly different views that you get from different people on these issues, and understandably there'll be a whole lot of passion. But I think none of that changes the fact that most of the conversations that people were wanting to have were about cost of living. We're about wages, we're about prices, about the urgent care clinic and Bankstown Hospital.
So you didn't find that this Gaza issue on pre-poll today was the dominant issue being raised with you?
Look, it was the first two conversations, and they were wildly different between what the Palestinian man was saying to me and what the Greens voter was saying to me. But most of the conversations, there may have been one more that went to Gaza, but most of the conversations were about cost of living. But yeah, that's a small sample, and that's just me being there for a few hours this morning.
Well, in your seat of Watson, I think the Muslim Votes Matter group have preferenced you 5th on the How to Vote card. I went through and it's online and looked at everyone's different electorates, because that's the sort of way I spend my time. And so you are above the Liberals there. So do you think that means that you're likely to be safe in your seat?
Oh, who knows? I've never taken it for granted. No matter what you're told your seat is on paper, you've got to treat every seat as a marginal. I've always done that, and I think most members of Parliament do that.
But do you expect a swing given the passions around the issue of Gaza?
Oh, look, the moment... up until this morning at 8 a.m, every single candidate had 0 against their name. So, yeah, I don't take anything for granted, and I always work on the basis that you've got to really scramble and fight for every vote that might be there. One thing in that How to Vote that surprised me was when you went through those numbers, they'd actually put the Clive Palmer party, Trumpet of Patriots, above me as well. So I really... I look at their policies and I can't for the life of me work out what the logic is in that preference flow.
Well, in Anna Lee's seat of Cowan, because I also looked up that electorate, they've actually put her after the Liberal candidate. This is, again, the Muslim Votes Matter group. I mean, how damaging may that be to Anna Lee? And were you surprised by that choice? Look,
I think when they're trying to take out the only Muslim woman in the Parliament, I think that will actually have more impact on the way that website's viewed and the way that campaign's viewed. Similarly, in Victoria, where we're running a Palestinian candidate is running for Labor, Bassem is, and in that seat they're trying to prevent him getting into Parliament as well. So, you know, I don't really know what's behind that campaign. I don't know what's driving it, because some of the decisions, whether it be Trumpet of Patriots or the attack on Anne or on Bassem, to me, the logic of it escapes me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's we've been trying to get one of those representatives on the show, and we've been unsuccessful. And just to fact check, you said Anna Lee's the only Muslim woman in the Parliament.
Sorry.
You misspoke.
Maureen Faruqi. I meant in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, in the House of Representatives.
Maureen was actually on the booth with me this morning, so I apologise for...
No, I just wanted to be clear before I got...
No, I'm glad you picked me up on that.
Now, last night's Four Corners minister revealed a series of red flags that appear to have been missed in the lead up to the Wakeley attack. The attacker was arrested, of course, with a teenager on a de-radicalisation program over a knife incident 5 months before the stabbing. And he was associating with extremists in a chat group which was monitored by ASIO and which had been calling for an attack on the bishop for years. If you're re-elected, will you call a review into whether there were intelligence and policing failures in the lead up to that attack as revealed by Four Corners?
Yeah, look, I've got full confidence in ASIO and full confidence in our security agencies, and I don't accept that there has been a situation where they knew that there was a direct risk to people's lives and they didn't take every responsible action. So yeah, but that's.
You don't think this deserves an investigation?
I've got full confidence in our security agencies. I really do.
And in relation to a question that's been going on for all week about whether you'd give the opposition a briefing on Indonesia and what attempts by Russia may have been made about a potential military base or an ability to land planes in Indonesia, why shouldn't the opposition get a briefing?
Okay, we're right on the edge of me being able to keep to the truce that's been agreed in terms of some of the answers that I'm wanting to give. So let me just, in keeping with the spirit that we've got today, to simply say that everything that is required and has traditionally been required under the caretaker conventions is being followed. And occasionally, and I've had some come directly to me, requests for briefings that fall outside the caretaker conventions, they're not provided. If it's within the caretaker conventions, then a briefing's provided. OK,
well, you're right. Today does have a different tone, so we'll leave it there. Tony Burke, though, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me back. See ya.
Staying with the issue around the Pope dying and the process that will now be embarked on, of course, by the Catholic Church. My next guest is Simon Smart, the Executive Director of the Centre for Public Christianity. Welcome to the program.
Oh, hi, thanks, Patricia.
Lovely to speak to you. Is Pope Francis perhaps the most intersectionally popular Pope we've ever had?
Certainly for a very long time, wasn't he? He's very popular. It's a big week, isn't it, as people consider his legacy. And I think he was very popular for all sorts of reasons. And he came in at a time where, let's be honest, there was a need for a shift. It was a bit of a crisis for the church. And I think he was elected largely because of that, and came in and was immediately wanting to set a different tone. And I think people came to appreciate that determination for giving this sense of humility and service and care for the outcast, care and compassion for others that he was just so known for prior to being Pope, as well as once he came into the office. So I just think people came to recognise that as not only in the way he acted, but the symbols that he brought with that, in which he was trying to show we're doing things differently. He kind of eschewed the trappings of papacy, famously opting to live in the sort of humble abode instead of the palace kind of setting. And I think people were ready for this kind of different leadership when it came to the church. So yeah, it was a very interesting choice, and I think one that many people are looking back on today fondly.
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting when I spoke to the Archbishop a little earlier, just the breadth of support Pope Francis has received. We've had the Greens leader from the left laud him. Right. We've had the Liberal leader laud him. Now, of course, people, generally are polite when these things happen, but to me, the tone of the commentary is not just being polite and doing the right thing. There is a very specific nature to it.
Yeah.
Why was he
absolutely
able to do that? Because it's quite a transformational role he's played.
It really is, and what an achievement. I remember writing about this when he first came, as many of us did, when he first came to the office, with a bit of a sense of excitement about what might be possible. And while people will look back on his time in the office with some degree of mixed feeling, many people were so impressed with what he did. And you mentioned the Greens leader. He did a lot. Francis did a lot in speaking out for care for the environment in a way that he saw as stewarding God's creation. And so he was able to bring that angle to this very important debate in a way that I think people, not just within the church, but all over the place came to respect. And that was the kind of person he was. I always think that the church is at its best when it's clearly having this outward focus. And that was his focus, wasn't it? All the time was that humility, it was the washing the prisoners' feet, it was embracing those who society had rejected. When people see that and they think this is the sort of church at its best, where it's out on the streets. I mean, he had that line about he wants to see a church that's bruised and dirty because it's out on the street. And he really did that. I really think when people see that, it's a universally admired virtue, and one that the church needs. And Francis showed, he really led the way in showing how to recapture that sense.
So the church, of course, will go through a period now where there is the official funeral, there's a process, then the conclave happens, and that's really quite a beautiful old tradition of choosing who the next pope is. What sort of pope does the Catholic Church need to keep building the church at a time of decline in the Western world?
Well, yes, in the Western world, it's an important point to make, because, of course, the church is growing in lots of parts of the world. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm not an expert on that part. I mean, I've seen the movie Conclave. I think lots of us did. It was fascinating, wasn't it? And it's apparently the case that Francis appointed 72% of the 120 people who will elect his successor. So in that sense, we might imagine some continuity in terms of what he was about. I think that would be a good thing for the church. I think the church needs to be engaging with the people where they're at. And there are so many big issues that the church needs to speak into in a way that's going to serve others. I mean, I think he showed great public moral leadership. So the next, you'd be looking for someone who's able to do that. I mean, it's interesting to think of the way in which Catholics all around the world, certainly here in Australia, have always been interested in building social capital, and schools and charities and hospitals have always been a big part of that. And a lot of Catholics would be proud of the way in which he was sort of tuned into that and was able to live it out. I would think he would have been hoping for a successor that will be able to do the same thing, to be able to speak the language that people will understand, to show why the spiritual hunger that people have is something that can be answered with Christian faith, and where he'd be appealing to people to look at the person of Jesus to see where they might find an answer to life. And I think Francis was able to reflect that character. He was very much a sort of Sermon on the Mount type pope, wasn't he? Care for the poor, interest in the lowly, speaking up against the powerful. He didn't mind doing that. It was a bit political for some people, but he spoke, wide criticism about war and immigration policies and other things. And that didn't mean he was loved by everyone, but I think people came to appreciate that there was something that he had to say.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks a lot, Patricia.
Although the two campaigns were officially on kind of hold today, there was a new policy announcement from the government. Labor says if it is re-elected, it will help protect victim survivors of domestic violence from financial abuse through tax, superannuation and social security debts. The Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, made the announcement in a speech earlier today.
We will take action to legislate practical changes in the superannuation, tax and social security systems so they can't be weaponised by perpetrators. We will look at how we can stop abusers receiving their victims' superannuation, because there is no world where we believe that perpetrators of violence should benefit from the death of someone they themselves have abused. We will prevent perpetrators from using the tax system and corporate systems to create debts as a form of coercive control, and ensure perpetrators are accountable for these debts if they do.
Now, although the death of the Pope is an international story, it is having a unique impact locally, falling in the last 2 weeks of a domestic election campaign. So let's bring in our regular Tuesday panel to discuss some of this. Sean Kelly is an author and columnist for the Nine papers and is a former advisor to two Labor Prime Ministers. Andrew Carswell is a former Prime Minister's advisor to Scott Morrison and now works as a consultant. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Now, this campaign has really, in some ways, been overwhelmed by lots of different international stories. Now the Pope's death, of course, which has come right when pre-poll was beginning. So we are going to discuss this and very much want our audience to know in a crude political way, if we can. And first to you, Andrew. I mean, this was the last time for Peter Dutton to make his pitch to voters, but of course, this means that I think the public is rightly focused on something else. How much of a disruptor is it?
Well, it's a sad interruption, but it is an interruption, and Peter Dutton needs every day, every hour of this week and next week to be able to sell that message in, to claw back the soft voters that are still in decision mode, and let's not forget there's 30 to 40% of Australians still in decision mode. They need to be reached. They need to be reached in a clear and coherent message. And there needs to be a time for Peter Dutton to build momentum, particularly into that last week. So I think, yes, it's an interruption today, and I think we go straight into the debate tonight, and then we've got more campaigning to come. But I think it will interrupt things for potentially a day and a half, and then the resumption of normality.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, Sean. It's yes, a day and a half of the intensity, and that the reason it interrupts is not only the respect that people have to show, but people are genuinely really, I know from our show, like people are interested in hearing about Pope Francis, and the news appetite is really waning for the election campaign when this is happening. So, Sean, given that, the way the leaders responded to this was obviously quite key. The Prime Minister has really lent into his Catholicism today. What did you make of the way he approached it?
I thought it was quite genuine. It felt like it's a subject that he's touched on pretty rarely, really, but he got into it a little bit today. Not with a heavy touch, just pretty lightly, I thought, but in a serious way. And I think that probably, I think that reflected well on him. I think both leaders gave considered statements today that reflected their genuine feelings about what is obviously a very sad event. I think in terms of the interruption to the campaign, I think that, the point you make, Patricia, is right, that it drags people away, but I think in some ways that's as much a reflection on the campaign as it is on the gravity of the event. So I'm not sure there was a lot tethering most voters to the campaign in the first place. So I'm not sure that it takes an enormous amount to interrupt their attention span at this point. I think one of the striking features of this campaign really is how few continuous cut-through themes there have been. As you said, there's been a number of international events. I think that's been part of it. Very broadly, it's been quite a jagged campaign. Part of that, I think, is Peter Dutton's difficulty in getting a handle on exactly what he was trying to do with this campaign. But overall, I think it's been very unmemorable, really, in terms of what you could say this campaign was about.
Yeah, there's been lots of chopping and changing. And Andrew, on that chopping and changing, we started the week before, of course, the Pope's death, with the opposition really shifting to crime and pushing national security again. I've spoken to pollsters, people off the record, about the data, and they're genuinely confused about why the coalition didn't just keep hammering its cost of living message, considering this is the number one issue. Is it a mistake to chop and change?
Not in this case, and particularly choosing a public holiday to do that as well. This is really a shout out to the outer Melbourne suburbs and the fringe suburbs around Sydney that are experiencing dramatic increases in crime. I mean, they made this announcement in Dunkley. The opposition leader's been to Gorton, to Bruce, to McEwen. These are seats that have been hit by crime significantly in the last 3 years. So it's really feeding into that and trying to show the public it understands what the situation is, even despite the fact that there are not many levers that they can necessarily pull because it's a state responsibility. But they're showing an interest, they're showing an understanding of what's going on in those suburbs, because that's where the battleground is emerging. I know the established polls and the published polls are saying one thing, but they may be capturing something that or not capturing something that is going on in those northern suburbs and that southeastern block of Melbourne in particular.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, I've been to those electorates. I've spent lots of time there. I'm from some of them. I know these places well. And crime is coming up, Sean, in a very big way in a lot of the surveys. So it is genuinely an issue that people are very angry about. So is it maybe then perhaps I'm wrong? It shouldn't be about just cost of living. Is the opposition leader trying to hunt for votes among people who are really very, very frustrated by the crime that they've seen?
I think this comes back to the overall level of dissatisfaction in the electorate. You saw in the Queensland state election campaign the now Premier make up an enormous amount of ground over the term by running very, very, very hard on a platform of curtailing youth crime, despite the fact that statistics suggest there's absolutely no crisis of youth crime there. Now that situation might not be exactly the same elsewhere, but I think that crime, the ideas about crime, fear of crime, can in a way act as a bit of a proxy for general dissatisfaction. And I think what you've seen around Australia over the last couple of years, because of inflation, because of living standards falling as cost of living has risen, is quite significant levels of dissatisfaction. You saw that in what was essentially a 2-year polling slide for the Albanese government. I think this, I've said this before, I'll say it again, I think this has been really underdone in the kind of focus on tactics and Albanese's confidence over the last 2 years and the voice. Inflation just did the government an enormous amount of damage. And I think the difficulty for Peter Dutton is, if you go back 9 months, this all kind of makes sense. You you cut the price of fuel, you lean heavily on crime, you argue that migration is really driving up house prices when people are generally pretty annoyed with the state of things. Suddenly all those things start to cohere into a very grim, dark picture of Australia. But what's happened in a factual sense is people's moods have lifted. People's moods have lifted in part because the economic situation has improved, because the inflationary situation has improved. And if you look at the right direction, wrong direction polls, they're still not in a great situation, but they're much better than they were a year ago. And I think that Peter Dutton's campaign made a lot of sense 12 months ago and makes a lot less sense now. So the crime thing isn't, it's not that it's entirely ill-judged, it's that it doesn't quite match the current electoral atmospherics. And I think in a way that is the summary of Peter Dutton's campaign, assuming that the current polls are accurate.
Now, the Coalition is set to announce their defence policy this week, it seems. Just, Andrew, what's your view on why this has happened so late? It seems, I mean, people are already voting. It's coming pretty late in the campaign. Yeah,
I'm not totally sure we need to be talking about it. I mean, for the Coalition, this kind of stuff is baked in. It's in their favour. They don't need to win over people on defence. They don't need to win over people on national security. People are voting for them on those issues. They need to win people over that are struggling with the cost of living, that are struggling with crime in their neighbourhoods. That is the focus that needs to be. So I'm surprised they're pivoting to defence. They have a very strong shadow defence minister, and it's great to get him up in the spotlight as well. But I would be sticking with the main issues, cost of living, heading into the last week.
That's interesting. I want to get your thoughts on that if I can, Sean, but also Andrew Hastie, who is the defence spokesperson. He hasn't really been front and centre in the campaign, and now that's becoming a bit of a distraction. I mean, the opposition leader's being asked about it. It seems unusual. Is that, I mean, I know it's not something that maybe lower information voters are noticing, but it does seem unusual.
I agree it does seem unusual, not in a horribly sinister sense. I'm just not quite sure what's behind it. Obviously, there was this difficulty that I think we spoke about last week or the week before with the question over his exact position on women in strong combat roles. I don't know how important that would be in the electorate, but of course you'd expect the Coalition to be avoiding any possible distractions at this point. As Andrew rightly says, Peter Dutton needs every minute and every hour and every day. I think on the defence thing, again, this comes back to timing. Not a bad area, not a bad area for Peter Dutton to be in. Is it the right time? I guess my question would be, as with a lot of these announcements, why didn't we see this a month or two ago? Why wasn't it used as a pivot point from one of the Trump inflection moments to say, well, Australia needs to be able to stand on its own. We have a strong relationship with the US, but we also need to have strength here. We need to take a leaf out of Anthony Albanese's book and say on defence, we need to have an Australian way, and that involves increasing our investment in defence. I think Peter Dutton actually could have made a lot of ground out of that. He could have used that as a bit of a replacement for the other policies that he hasn't ended up announcing, and it could have kind of filled that vacuum. But coming at this point, I think it just adds to that hodgepodge sense. It's not a terrible thing. It's not a mistake. He probably needs to do it, but I'm just not sure it's going to benefit him a huge amount. Final question on something I've been noticing, and I wrote a column about it on Monday, and now the news poll data has been published about women and a lack of connection between women and their voting intentions and Peter Dutton. Now, I have to ask you this, Andrew, because that was an issue for the man you worked for, Scott Morrison. I think there were expectations that Peter Dutton maybe was bringing those women back, but is this still an issue?
It's a slight issue, and it's certainly noticeable. And I think what's happening right now, I think, is that the anger and frustration that these voters have towards the Albanese government is not strong enough to overcome the hesitation that they have with Peter Dutton, and that is clear. And that's, you know, there's the element of Trump that's sitting around this as well. I mean, Trump was a roller coaster, a steam train through the Coalition's campaign, and really railroaded that from day one. And I think Australian women looked at what was going on in Washington and thought, thanks but no thanks. But that's hardly a Peter Dutton singular issue. It's happening to Conservatives across the world. It's happening in Canada, where Pierre Poilievre was going to romp it in and then suddenly behind in that election contest. It happened in the UK, where the Conservatives and Nigel Farage had Labor on the ropes until Trump intervened in global affairs. So he has run the sword through Conservatives across the world. Peter Dutton is no singular issue there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Just final word to you, Sean, the women issue. Women are 51% of the population. We have compulsory voting in this country. So if you don't have women, you do have a problem.
Look, that news poll analysis was striking, but it was striking only insofar as it reflected the overall shift in the numbers, which have obviously been dramatic over the last 2 or 3 months. Of course, as I've said before on this program, Trump has played an enormous role, the decisive role, I think, in this election campaign. I think this question around male and female voters really, really interesting. It's particularly interesting when we start talking about younger voters. There have been a lot of very strong statements made by pollsters in different countries over the last few years, some of them contradictory, but it does seem clear that something that real gaps are opening up between men and women, between young men and young women, also between really young people under 20 and people over 20, and then again between people 20 to 50 and people 50 and above. So I think the electorate, of course, has always been fragmented in certain ways. Demographics control a lot of things, but it seems to be becoming polarised in a very strange and potentially quite disturbing way.
Yeah, it's a pretty alarming trend, that's for sure. It means that the experiences of these two groups of people are quite different, you'd think, that they're having these perspectives. That's a whole other discussion. Let's have it again. Thank you to both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Lost amid the international news is that early voting has begun in Australia. That's right. If you have a reason to tell the AEC that you actually can't vote on voting day, you can go and pre-poll. Kate Chaney is the independent MP for Curtin in Western Australia and has been out on the booths this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Patricia.
First of all, what is your reflection on the passing of Pope Francis? Of course, that has been the reason politics has really almost been put on pause today.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously was a great leader who really focused on protecting the vulnerable. And I think that's a message that has resonated worldwide. And there are a lot of people who will be very sad about his passing, whether they're Catholic or not, because I think we do need more of that compassion in a lot of our global discussion. So, I'm sad to see his passing.
Yeah. Now, you've been out on pre-poll today, day one. How did it go?
Well, we're still in the middle of school holidays here, so it's been steady this morning, but I suspect that the volume of people passing through pre-poll will build this week and next week. I've had some great conversations, got lots of volunteers at the pre-polling booths, and it's great to see people coming through and getting started early. So I feel like it's on and we're ready for it.
There are a couple of things I just talked to my panel about that I'd like to get your thoughts on. Of course, you were elected in, a wave, the Teal wave as it's been known at the last election. Lots of reasons why, of course, you were all elected and different reasons across your electorates, I acknowledge. But one reason was women being quite angry with the previous government and, the so-called women's vote, if you could kind of homogenise it that way, was certainly activated around some of those issues. There's a news poll out today suggesting that Peter Dutton has an issue with women. Is that something that you've observed in the last couple of weeks of campaigning?
Well, I don't think that a Peter Dutton-led Liberal government is doing any more for women than a Scott Morrison-led Liberal government did. And certainly there are a lot of people, a lot of women in my electorate who don't feel that the level of compassion or kindness that they would like to see in politics is reflected in what they see coming out of the Liberal Party. So that polling would not surprise me. It's not just women who think that, but I think there is a broad sense of dissatisfaction as we see Peter Dutton take the party further to the right and further towards a Trump approach to politics. I think he's really losing women in moderate electorates like mine who are much more interested in the centre and have a strong sense of equality.
Just to push back a little bit on that idea that he's moved the Liberal Party further to the right, just on some issues. Like, for instance, the other day he was asked a question about the judgment in the UK in relation to the definition of women. That's been a really big debate around the world, but obviously the UK is moving in a particular direction. He was asked this question and he wouldn't go there. He didn't give this any oxygen. He didn't want to comment on this. Now, he's been criticised, I've seen online, from people like the Australian Christian Lobby who don't see him as right-wing enough. Do you give him any credit for trying to avoid some of these culture wars?
Well, I think it's great if we can all avoid these culture wars, and I think they are really a distraction from the big issues that we're facing, the long-term issues that determine the future of the country, rather than these short-term issues that aim to polarise people and create division. So I encourage any moves that move us away from culture wars and more to solving the big issues.
Now, the other big policy offering, which of course affects your constituents because you're such a resources state, is the Coalition's gas policy. Are you getting a sense from your voters that it's a policy that they support?
Well, I think there are a few special things about Western Australia. We do have amazing resources. We also have amazing natural features, and there is a strong sense that people want to protect nature, and also a broad awareness that as the world decarbonises, we need to have an economic base that continues to be prosperous. So that's what I hear from constituents here, is they want to know where are the jobs going to be in 10, 20, 30 years, and make sure that we're boldly moving towards that economy rather than holding on to the economy of the past.
Do you get a sense about whether there is a minority government incoming? You obviously are being fiercely contested by the Liberal Party, who hope to regain your seat. But, as honestly as you can be with me, what is the feeling on the ground, and whether, you'll be able to maintain perhaps or even gain, because you know that there has been a Labor majority government, but have a stronger role in the lower house?
And Patricia, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but certainly I'll be leaving nothing on the table. I feel like there is a strong sense in my electorate that people have really liked being represented differently. I don't think either major party has done anything that would reverse the long-term trend of declining primary support for those parties. And I think people are really starting to come around to the idea that a balanced parliament may actually be the best chance we have to drive better long-term thinking and policy that's based on what we need rather than party ideology. So I certainly am getting good, strong signs from my community, but it's definitely going to be close.
Obviously, this issue around integrity and transparency has become one of the rallying cries of your political movement, or the different elements of it. Today, Monique Ryan, who is another independent, not you, but has been asked questions by Sky News. She wouldn't speak to them, and it's been seen as a pretty negative moment perhaps for her for not speaking to the reporter trying to speak to her. Do you think that is damaging to the notion that Teal independents are transparent and welcome scrutiny?
Well, I think everyone will make their own decisions about which media they speak to, but there's been a pretty concerted attack from parts of the media against the independents, and I think that it's a perfectly reasonable decision to decide in what circumstances you're going to talk to media. We've certainly seen Peter Dutton not doing as much media as might be expected for someone in his position. There's been huge media pressure and attention on the crossbenchers, and I'm not surprised that people are making decisions on a day-to-day basis about the circumstances in which they're ready to have a conversation. That's
an interesting point you make. So, do you decline Sky News invitations?
Oh, look, I've done plenty of Sky News in the past, and we make decisions at the time. There's a lot of A lot of media scrutiny, a lot of media interest in the campaign, which is understandable. My main focus is how do I communicate with the people here in my electorate who are my priority and who I'm accountable to. So that's what guides my decisions about media.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kate Chaney, and I appreciate you saying yes to speaking to us, and I'd like you to come back again if you can.
Thanks so much, Patricia.
And that's afternoon briefing for today. A couple of things to let you know. We've had some really, really interesting interviews this afternoon, and you can find them on YouTube, where you can search for afternoon briefing. Also on the iView app, where you can also search for afternoon briefing. We spoke to the Archbishop of Melbourne, talking about the Pontiff's legacy and what this means for the Catholic Church. We also spoke a little earlier to the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, who is, really a very senior Catholic MP in the Parliament, about his reflections, but also some political issues. Of course, tonight another leaders' debate, and so while politics is a little quieter, it certainly will ramp up again. So we'll be back again tomorrow. Stay with us here on the ABC News Channel. Catherine Robinson is up next with today's top stories. I'll see you tomorrow.